The VA is a huge bureaucracy, and the folks in the VA are under enormous pressure to move a large number of cases through, and there's a point system for how they do things that does not encourage them to just sit down and work the file and figure it out. It really encourages them to take one action and then kick the file into suspense. And the net result of that is that it's very rare for someone at the VA in the adjudication system, unless they're really, really committed, to just take the time to really look at the whole file and put all the pieces together. So mostly they're working with inadequate information in too much of a hurry, and the net result is that a lot of times things don't come out right.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Attorney Francis Jackson.
Welcome to Victory Over VA, your guide to unlocking your veterans' disability benefits. If you're a veteran applying for benefits, be sure to subscribe for the latest developments in VA disability. I'm Francis Jackson, this is Christian Terrison, and we're from Jackson & MacNichol, a law firm that specializes in getting justice for veterans on their VA disability claims. So, who is this for? Well, this podcast is for veterans, obviously, but it's also for people who are concerned about veterans, whether you're a friend or a relative or just someone in the community who wants to make sure that our veterans are being fairly treated. You know, all of these folks can benefit from some portion of one of our podcasts. So today, we're going to focus in on a topic that is near and dear to lots of veterans' hearts, which is the level of errors in disability ratings made at the initial level by the VA rating staff.
And I think it was the VA Office of the Inspector General had their own report recently. Even I was shocked by the number. What was it?
75%.
Yeah, in that one case they looked at, 75% of decisions
Folks seeking 100% benefits, yep.
Yeah, had some type of mistake, and significant mistake. There were some overpayments, many more underpayments, which comes as a surprise to nobody. But we thought this would be a timely topic. So
yeah, what we have here is the VA's Office of the Inspector General is charged with looking at the operations of the VA across the board and trying to assess when operations are going well and when things are not being done correctly. And they look at various aspects of the VA at various points in time. But this particular report was focused on the period from May of 2022 to April of 2023, specifically the regional office rating decisions dealing with folks asking for awards of 100% benefits. And the conclusion, as Christian alluded to a moment ago, was that 75% of the time they got it wrong. Now, a couple of things that are probably should be mentioned in fairness. That's the period of time when VA was staffing up to handle the expected onslaught of claims based on the passage of the PACT Act. So they knew they were going to have lots of claims coming. They knew they needed more staff. They hired lots of people with no background in VA adjudication and tried to train them up quickly. There was a congressional oversight hearing on this at the House, and one of the conclusions that was reached was that the training that had been done was not adequate. And that's not surprising. VA ratings are very complex. It takes years to really understand most of the nuances. I don't think there's anybody that really understands all the nuances everywhere in the VA system, but to understand most of the nuances, my impression is that it takes people at least 2 years to get to the point where they can really reliably look at cases and most of the time get most of it right. You know, everybody has to go and dig in the books periodically to make sure they got it exactly right. But you know, you can't just throw new people in and expect them to understand it. And the VA didn't have the luxury of training these people for 2 years before they put them to work. So you know, there are lots of new people out there. And in fairness to the VA, I should also say that their problem was seriously compounded when COVID hit. Lots of VA employees were older because many of them come to the VA as a second career after the military. And during COVID, their agency, I think more than any other, was hit by, number one, deaths among their older employees, and number two, retirements and resignations among their older employees who didn't want to take the risk of continuing in a public-facing role. So they've really been struggling, and the result is, as the IG found, a lot of problems in the rating decisions.
Yeah. In your decades of experience doing this type of law, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see made at the regional office level when it comes to rating decisions?
Well, I think that's kind of a question of how you want to characterize them, but a couple of things that we see just kind of over and over. One is the VA will fail to get an adequate C&P opinion that really fits the circumstances of the case. And, you know, the VA relies on outside contractors to provide their C&P exams now. They used to do a lot of them in-house. That pretty much doesn't happen anymore. So they are at the mercy of a couple of large contract firms, which in turn hire local medical folks to do C&P exams. Now, I think it is fairly self-evident that the people who are willing to hire out to do occasional C&P exams are probably not the most highly paid people in the medical field in their area, and sometimes that reflects on their level of competence. But it also reflects that C&P examinations are not what they went to medical school for. There's no course in medical school on how to do a good C&P exam. So this is something they get from training that's done by the contractor. It tends to be fairly superficial. We see C&P exams all the time where the examiner doesn't even provide an opinion on the critical point of whether the condition is service-connected or not. So I know I'm kind of going on at length about C&P exams because it's such a sore point.
Well, they are one of the number one spots where I find appealable issues.
Yep, because they just go off the track so many different ways. But that's one of the problems. Another of the problems is that sometimes the VA rating staff themselves don't really appreciate the importance of some of the facts, and they'll kind of skip over them, or they just flat out say they don't believe the veteran. I mean, that happens.
Right, and I mean, and that takes away, it's the regional offices or the board's job to determine the veteran's credibility, not the C&P examiners.
Yep, but the rating staff sometimes make the same mistake of, they'll say that they just plain don't believe the veteran about what he or she says happened. And those cases often end up at the board with a need to get extraneous evidence or external evidence to demonstrate that, in fact, this is what happened. And we have a case going right now that it just causes me to shake my head. The gentleman was stationed in Alaska. He was in a construction battalion. They had heavy equipment there in the field. And because it's so cold, they would have to leave the heavy equipment running so it didn't freeze up. So here they are, they're out in the field, they're in their tents, in their mummy bags to keep them warm. And this particular event, the bulldozer is sitting there idling, and it vibrates. And eventually the vibration was such that it slipped into gear and just started crawling forward, ran over a tent, and crushed and killed the occupants. We have the newspaper article showing that report of that's what happened. The VA says, we can't find any military records to substantiate this, so we're declining the claim. I mean, it's crazy. But you get that kind of stuff where if you can't just put the military records right under their nose, they won't believe it happened. Alex,
and specifically military records,
yeah,
too.
yeah, oh yeah. Alexandra had a case recently, within the last year, where the VA refused to grant benefits for PTSD to this World War II Navy survivor. And he said that the stressor event that caused him to have PTSD was he was on a ship that was accompanying another ship that was torpedoed, and his ship was charged with rescuing the survivors and hauling out the bodies. The VA said, well, they couldn't confirm that. She was able to go online to the military archives and get a picture showing his ship, the sinking ship, and people attempting to rescue the people in the water. I mean, it's just, she submitted that, and I'm happy to say that the board very quickly granted his benefits. But it's this unwillingness to accept the information from the veteran that makes so many of these rating decisions problematic and requires sometimes years and years of appeals before you get it straightened out. It can be extremely frustrating for veterans and their advocates.
Are there other, I guess, reasons why either, medical evidence or, records of incidents like that, news reports and things like that, can get overlooked by the regional office? It sounds like they just really have a myopic view on taking just, for instance, they never look at the personnel records as far as I can tell. Is that accurate?
They don't look at them in the first instance. Sometimes, if the case goes up on appeal, they'll get ordered to get them. But yeah, the way the VA gets records is kind of, I don't know how best to describe it. It's limited. That's the best way I can put it without being pejorative. What happens is the VA routinely gets the service records, including the service medical records. But the service medical records only are local treatment. So if the person is sent to a hospital facility, a military hospital facility, those records do not go into the service medical record. They have to be obtained separately from the hospital or from the archives repository, depending on how old they are. One of the other things that we learned painfully is that if you ask for military records and they relate to mental health, they won't tell you that they won't send them to you. The only time they will send them is if a physician requests them. And it's just a strange system. And there are, as you mentioned, also the personnel records. Now, in many instances, the personnel records will have information that shows that particular events occurred that do not show up in the service record. And just a couple of examples. We had one case where the gentleman said, I had these injuries in a car crash in Germany. And the VA said, there's no evidence of a car crash in Germany in your records. Well, we got his personnel file, and tucked into the personnel file is a disciplinary citation for taking his roommate's car without permission and crashing it. And so, yes, there was a crash, and yes, that's where he got hurt, and we're sorry that it didn't show up elsewhere in his service records, but it did happen, and ultimately they granted the benefits. We had a similar one where the veteran, while he was in the service in Germany also, had tried to cross the tracks of the local tram and hadn't allowed enough time and got hit by the tram. And there is a record in his service records where he was disciplined for getting into this accident with the tram and the military vehicle he was driving. But again, the VA said, oh, there's no record of any crash. You didn't get hurt in the service. Well, surprise, surprise. Yes, there is a record, and yes, he did. And ultimately, again, he got benefits. But it's that kind of thing. I mean, keep in mind, the VA is a huge bureaucracy. And the folks in the VA are under enormous pressure to move a large number of cases through. And there's a point system for how they do things that does not encourage them to just sit down and work the file and figure it out. It really encourages them to take one action and then kick the file into suspense. And the net result of that is that it's very rare for someone at the VA in the adjudication system, unless they're really, really committed, to just take the time to really look at the whole file and put all the pieces together. So mostly they're working with inadequate information in too much of a hurry, and the net result is that a lot of times things don't come out right.
Now, on the rating schedule end of things, are there any, particular conditions that you see the regional office making a lot of rating errors for? Typically like underestimating severity?
Well, I'm hard-pressed to say that there are particular ones. It seems to happen across the board. But I guess if I was going to single out any, it would probably be mental health. The ratings for mental health, in my experience, often seem to get underrated. I'm not sure why that is, but I think part of it goes back to what we were talking about before with C&P examinations. One of the problems with mental health is that it's hard to get a good picture of someone's mental health in a snapshot, one-time, short examination. I mean, you can tell if the person's in contact with reality. You can probably tell if they have some level of depression or anxiety. But there are an awful lot of mental health conditions and degrees of severity that really are not amenable to a 20-minute evaluation, that you just can't tell. And so a lot of the time, I think mental health conditions in particular end up being underrated in C&P exams. And generally speaking, the folks who do the rating at the VA consider themselves pretty much bound by the C&P examination results. So if the examiner said this person's their symptoms are at the 30% level, it's very unlikely that the rater is going to spend a lot of time digging into the person's treatment records to see if there are symptoms that really show it should be at the 50% level. It's most likely that, oh, we got a 30% rating, okay, the rating's 30%, check, done, next. That seems to happen a lot.
Yeah, I know I've seen C&P exams where the narrative portion will describe pretty severe symptomology and even say, oh yeah, and it's supported by the record, but then the check boxes and the part where they say, yeah, this is consistent with a 30% rating or what have you, those are the 30% rating. And you look at it and you've got the medical records that agree with the narrative box, the CMP exam itself is internally inconsistent too. So,
Yeah.
What
It happens a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. But thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of Victory Over the VA. Please be sure to like and subscribe and join us again next week.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next week.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.